Professor, how are you?
Doing well. Abdullah,
Good.
how are you?
Awesome. So this is episode 2. After an introduction, we want to jump into one of the themes, one of the main topics. Hopefully that will guide this series, and obviously it's relevant to your work. So I want to ask you about the Islamophobia industry. What can you tell us about that?
So the Islamophobia industry is really the thing, the entity that makes all of the anti-Muslim sentiment tick. It's a very powerful industry that makes a lot of money, so it's very lucrative. And essentially what we're talking about, we're looking at an assortment of activists, bloggers, pseudo-scholars, hedge funds, organizations that work together. They share each other's content, they share each other's material, they invite each other to come speak at their events, and essentially what they do is they coordinate certain messages, certain rhetoric, and certain narratives around U.S. Muslims that are harmful. Essentially, the main principal guiding element of the Islamophobia industry is to essentially demonize Muslims and to paint Islam and the Islamic faith as somehow antithetical to the values that we have, or the perceived values that we have in this country. So again, the industry side of things has to do with this fact that it's a business, it's a lucrative business, and it makes money. And they have books, they have websites, they have blogs,
videos,
speaking
talk
engagements,
shows,
exactly. So
radio shows.
they make money, and I think one of the recent developments which is concerning is that they're turning into activists. So they're actually going out, they're protesting, they're getting more and more people into their camp. And what I often talk about is we need an anti-Islamophobia industry. So people who are fighting against this form of this misunderstanding and this bigotry and this hate, people who are fighting against that, they need to come together and they need to unite and they need to figure out a way to fight back against the industry, because it's really powerful. You know, obviously I'm not a fan of it, but I also completely recognize that they're effective in what they do. So we need to have
$200 million industry, is that right?
probably more at this point. And I think what's unfortunate is the industry is now making its way into the most prominent political arenas in the country. So we have individuals like Brigitte Gabriel, right? So she's an activist for Act for America, which is this anti-Muslim activist organization, and there have been pictures of her in the White House or somewhere on Capitol Hill with Donald Trump. So even people like John Bolton, who is now the NSA advisor, I mean, for years and years, he's been well known among those looking at the Islamophobia industry and trying to counter it. Like, we know that this individual is no fan of Muslims or the Islamic faith or the basic values that we have in this country: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of conscience. So we have a real challenge in front of ourselves. The 2016 election brought the Islamophobia industry into the complete mainstream. So we need to figure out a way to combat some of this stuff.
I have a number of questions, right? A number of things come to mind. I'll start with, what do you think are American values?
They're in the Constitution.
Okay.
Freedom of speech,
Okay.
freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. I think the American value is this idea of being part of a civic nation. So people of all different faiths, all different races, ethnicities, all of these individuals, all of these elements are part of what ideally it means to be an American.
Sure.
So I think these are the values that need to be uplifted. They need to be kind of held up and shared in the light rather than kept in the dark. And I think the Islamophobia industry, you know, like they claim to be proponents of these values, but I think fundamentally they oppose them, and they oppose them largely through the prism of Muslims and other groups as well. They don't discriminate their hate.
Sure. So these values sound very broad, right? Very general. They're not your values, they're not my values. Trump is not more American or more patriotic than anyone else, even if some people feel like they have a monopoly over American values. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, they're our values, right? Like, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, human beings. that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's the Declaration of Independence, founding document of this country. And it doesn't say we. It's not supposed to pertain to a race or a religion or ethnicity or a certain cultural group. The we is whoever's a citizen. And we have certain forces in this country, among them those involved with the Islamophobia industry, who are trying to limit the definition of what it means to be we.
Sure.
They're thinking of it through the lens of like an ethno-national state.
Sure.
Or a fundamentally religious state. You know, people within the Islamophobia industry saying this country is a Christian nation or is founded by Judeo-Christian values, like blatantly ignoring the fact that, you know, I often say this when I'm speaking, like Islam didn't come out of left field. You know, it's a continuation of the monotheistic tradition, and the values that you find in the Quran can be also found in previous Abrahamic texts. So it's a deliberate move by those in the Islamophobia industry and politicians to keep Muslims outside of that we and outside of that us. What they're trying to do is create this binary. You know, it's all playing off a binary of them. You know, Muslims are somehow out there and they're different and they're subhuman. Yeah, I mean, it gets to a point where it's subhuman, which is very, very dangerous. But like fundamentally, you know, Muslims have always been here. They've always contributed to the well-being of the country. But even if they say they didn't contribute to the well-being of the country, they're still citizens, and they still always have been. And that's what we need to protect. I mean, the fact that what makes you belong to this country is the constitutional principles. It's the values. It's the idea that you're a citizen. You can speak any language. You can look how you want. You can pray to whatever God or no God. What makes you an American is the constitutional principles, and the Islamophobia industry is trying to take those principles away from all of us.
Sure. So it's an oxymoron for a group that calls themselves American or patriotic to say go back to where you came from. It's an oxymoron. It's exactly antithetical to the values they're saying that
I mean,
they're very proud of.
Yeah, and when the Islamophobia industry tells people to go back to where you came from, you know, it's absurd. Like, one, it assumes that Muslims are not native to this land, and they are, and they always have been. I mean, Muslims lived on U.S. soil before the U.S. even existed. You know, so there are some facts that cannot be disputed that the Islamophobia industry kind of ignores. You know, like this idea that we got to keep Islam away from the mainstream and we got to keep Muslims outside of the boundaries of this country. It suggests that Muslims are foreign and that they're not native to the land. But as I said, I mean, African Americans who happen to be slaves were the first Muslims in this country. So there's basic historical facts that the Islamophobia industry as this kind of massive entity blatantly ignores, which is not good. They don't like facts. They don't like facts at all.
Got it. So a couple more things. You mentioned early on that this industry includes, you know, different organizations, different activists. You mentioned the term pseudo scholars.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that? I mean, we are at one of the top universities in the country.
Yeah.
You are a scholar. You're a professor.
I think.
What does it mean to be a scholar, and why would you say they're pseudo scholars?
I mean, I do think that it's important, if you're engaging with knowledge and scholarship, to go through a process in which other scholars check you, to make sure that what you're writing and what you're thinking meets the body of knowledge that came before you. So for me, I had to go through, 12 years of studying. It was a BA, a master's, years and years of field work, and then a PhD. It's a long time. And I got beat up. Some scholars are like, you're absolutely wrong, you got to do this, you got to do that. So engaging in scholarship forces you to be more objective and put your own ideas aside and try to search or try to get closest to the truth. So what we have with pseudo-scholars, a lot of people who claim to be experts never went through this process. And then even some that do claim to be scholars aren't even experts in the Islamic tradition. So like someone like Sam Harris, he's kind of one of the talking heads of the Islamophobia industry, and he's this type of new atheist. Like, I'm pretty sure that he's had no formal education in the realm of Islamic studies.
And most people haven't.
No.
Most Muslims haven't. Most professors in America that are teaching courses related to some Muslims have not, right?
Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, yeah, I mean, you know, you also have this issue of like Google scholars, which is these are the people that are kind of a product of the pseudo scholars. They go onto Google and they type in what is the Quran, and usually, unfortunately, a lot of the times what happens is like the information or the material that the Islamophobia industry produces
comes up first,
and that's a significant challenge, especially with people that have no exposure to Muslims, and again have no formal education and don't really care to get to know Muslims. They just see these blog articles and they get wrong information, and then it confirms their worst thought about the Islamic faith or Muslims, and then they go off the rails.
It's an echo chamber.
It's an echo chamber, yeah. So the pseudo scholar, like most of them, and then some of them who are some of the members of the Islamophobia industry who are highly influential, again, I don't know what their credentials are. Like, I really don't know what their credentials are.
They sell out events.
Yeah, and like even
Following.
to give you a comparison, like Candace Owens, right? So African American, basically like a token African American woman used by the far right in this country to justify white nationalism. Again, this is an African American woman talking about something that is inherently racialized, and she's saying that white nationalism is not a problem. Now, if you go into her background, Candace Owens, I mean, college dropout, no significant formal training in any type of scholarship with any type of scholar on the issue of white nationalism. And the far right political forces in this country invited her to testify on Capitol Hill on behalf of white nationalism. It's absurd. It's people that are very clever. I'm not going to lie, she's probably a smart person and she's got ideas and she's able to effectively spew her rhetoric and her propaganda. But it's like asking me, Abdullah, like, if you asked me to comment on the latest and greatest dental technology, and I took a year to study the latest and greatest in terms of dental technology or whatever it might be, and then I come out and I'm really persuasive and I have all these ideas and people are like, oh, this guy really sounds good, even though I have no idea what I'm talking about. So we have this kind of growing body of people who are speaking on issues that they have absolutely no clue about. They don't live it, they don't study it, they don't interact with it. They sit behind their computer screens, they Google about it, and they cling to certain personalities and certain organizations, and that's how the misinformation gets spread.
Got it. I have maybe a final question. Quite controversial, though. I really want to, pick your brain on this one.
Let's do it.
So we both know, and I think most Americans know, and most people know, that the average, if not every single American in this country, every Muslim American in this country is living within the confines of the law, is following the Constitution, is pursuing their American dream, not that different than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But is there anything about the Islamic faith? Is there anything about Islam itself, right? Whether it's tradition or history or theology or law or whatever it is, do you think that is a clash with American values? Or
no, I mean, because Islam isn't, it's not a monolith, and this is my view of it. Like with any faith, like you can make of faith what you want. It's what you bring to the texts. It's what you bring to the traditions. It's what you've experienced in your life. Those things that are inside of us, like that's what creates the interpretation of whether Islam is compatible with American values or Western values. So, with that said, we do have obvious things that are completely compatible between the Islamic tradition and the idealist American values, like freedom of religion. Like we know plenty of verses in the Quran, no compulsion in religion, people are allowed to believe what they do, and even saying like things like, righteous believers who happen to be Jewish, Christian, Sabians have a chance to get into heaven. We have Prophet Muhammad guaranteeing the protection of religious freedom and freedom of worship and religious liberties for Jews and for Christians. We have Muhammad, who at the time in the 7th century was a progressive leader in terms of women's rights. So, I mean, we have those elements that we can certainly say, absolutely, the Islamic faith is no different, really, in some ways than American values. But then again, like, you can go and find Quranic text, passages of the Quran, take them out of context, not understand how they were revealed or why they were revealed, and then you could say, well, see, it's not compatible. So you can cherry pick either way, and I think it's really important that all of us, people of conscience, find passages in all of our religious texts and examples from all of our traditions, and find these pieces of knowledge and find ways of making it compatible with U.S. values and American values. I think it's completely possible. It's just what's our intention? You know, like, if we want to bridge this perceived gap between the West and Islam, we can definitely do it. If you want to divide it,
easy,
you can do that as well. So what's your intention? You know, what is your goal? Like, do people want to wedge the divide and make it even worse? Or do we want to be proactive and constructive and find ways of building a stronger bridge? So it's really about intention, I think.
Professor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This was great.
Thank you.
Looking forward to the next one.
Me too.
Right, so 16 minutes and 30 seconds.
Great.
I think that's good, right?
Yeah, that's